I am delighted to introduce our presenter today. This is the third time he's been with us on this particular topic, and he's going to be with us again in the spring to take us right up to the present on the topic of religion in America. James Bratt earned his BA from Calvin University and a PhD from Yale University. He taught at the University of Pittsburgh, but spent most of his career at Calvin University, where he focused on the intellectual and religious history of early America. Professor Bratt is the author of 8 books and quite a few more articles than that. He is a Fulbright Scholar and the recipient of Calvin University's Presidential Award for Exemplary Teaching. And partly for that reason, it is a delight to welcome you here. Welcome.
Oh, am I on? Okay, everybody hear me? Okay. If you're like my wife, you'll regret that. Sometimes. Oh, it's great to be back. I love teaching here and seeing some familiar faces, some new faces. Yeah, so this is part 3 of kind of my bread and butter knowledge and coursework. Learned it. Was introduced to it by one of the great American religious historians, certainly the greatest of his generation, Sidney Alstrom at Yale. And it's wonderful to have our old New Haven buddies, Debbie and Barry, in the house. Don't play handball with Barry. you just can't win, especially in an August West exposed handball court in the Payne Whitney Gymnasium. It was like a sweat box. And the honor was if your hand was so swollen by the end of the match that you couldn't get the glove off. Then you were a real man. When you're a graduate student, you need reminders that you're still a regular person. Anyway, Religion in America, Part 3, Souls in an Industrial Society. So we're going to run from the Civil War up to World War II, and then next spring, I hope to do World War II to the present. It's really light over the top. It's just 4 sessions, but I'll try to bring out the main themes. So I'll get into the issues or the realities, the dynamics of an industrial society in a minute. But first, a quick review of where we left off last time. So last time we went from the Revolution up to the Civil War, religion and the founding. So the United States formally was not founded on a Christian basis, but because of the remarkable spread of evangelical religion, especially through revivals, it soon became a Christian nation. So the formal state apparatus might be neutral or secular, but the culture was seething with evangelical Christianity, but also with other things, because it was a wide open environment, an open laboratory for experimentation. And everybody was out there with his, sometimes her own product. So this is the birth phase of the Mormons, the Adventists, utopian communities like the Oneida community, spiritualists, so forth and so on. So it was a real open experimental laboratory for religion. But all that said, both with the evangelicals and all these other experimenters, the prominence of religion did not help solve America's worst political problem ever, and the worst political crisis ever. So that the question of slavery rose to the top and was expunged through the worst bloodletting that the United States has ever seen. Used to be that the casualty toll of the Civil War was seen somewhere in the 600,000s. It's now up to 700,000s when you do, replacement theory. And that was about 3% of the American population. So do the math now, that would be, 10 million or whatever. So it's, we're coming out then in this course, we're coming out of a major crisis. And a major bloodshedding. And what do you do with that? And where do you go from that? So today we're going to talk about one of the great, maybe the greatest results of the Civil War, which was the emancipation of the former enslaved population, some 4 million, and the rise of Black churches. Next time we're going to study the great immigrant tide, especially of Catholics and Jews from Europe to the United States. But also there were a lot of Protestants in the mix, including a lot of Dutch Reformed people. This is the peak of Dutch Reformed, or Dutch immigration to the US. Then the week after that, we'll talk about another civil war among Protestants. With the challenges of science and industry, Protestants began dividing between a liberal or progressive movement and a resistant evangelical movement. And after all the great crusades of the first part of the 20th century, the great moral crusade of prohibition, the great political crusades of progressivism, and the greatest crusade of all to save the world for democracy and to end all war, World War I, when all those crusades kind of went belly up or hit the wall, what do you do? So from 1920 to 1940, we'll look at the two radical responses to these failures. On the liberal side, the progressive wing of Protestantism is neo-orthodoxy, associated with Reinhold and H. Richard Niebuhr, especially. On the other side of the street, evangelicalism, the cutting edge of evangelicalism becomes fundamentalism. And we have 100 years ago this year, the great monkey trial in Dayton, Tennessee, the Scopes trial, but also a separation of hardcore, self-described Orthodox Protestants out of the main consensus of American Protestantism into their own subculture. They will reemerge as evangelicals again in the 1960s, and we're living with the legacy of that still today. So that's the map of where we're going to go this term, and we'll go into the evolution of Black churches from 1865 to 1940. We have the Emancipation Proclamation and the self-emancipation of the enslaved population rushing off to the Union Army as they invaded the South, liberated the South, depending on your point of view. So self-emancipation and a declaration of their own religious independence. So we have the formation of the Black church in the Reconstruction era. Then Reconstruction gets turned around, and we have the imposition of the Jim Crow regime, a time of great suffering and oppression for Black people in the United States. And we'll see the religious responses to that. And then from 1914 to 1940, really up to 1970, we have the Great Migration. A lot of fine books describing this phenomenon. Massive shift of the African-American population from the rural South to the urban North and West. So it's like a classic immigration of Catholics and Jews and Protestants too from Europe. It's rural people moving to urban environments where the language is different. So in many ways, the Great Migration of African-Americans mimics or parallels that of Europeans to the United States, although there are significant differences as well. Okay, so these are the three things we're going to cover quickly today. And by the way, if you have questions anytime, raise your hand. We can take them at the end, but sometimes it's better if we take them right at the moment too. So help yourself. So prelude to the formation of the Black church is one of the greatest movements of population in American history, maybe even in world history. From 1808, when the international slave trade was banned by provision of the Constitution, so no more fresh importations from Africa, from 1808 to 1865, some 1 million people were uprooted from the Tidewater area of Virginia and North Carolina. So in the upper right-hand corner of the map on the screen, I'm not going to use the pointer because that doesn't show up on the distance for distance learners. We have you see all those arrows moving out of the Chesapeake Bay region by sea, but most often by land, in the kind of coffles that you see depicted in the illustration here. So 1 million people moving west and southwest. And that's courtesy of the clever invention by that Connecticut Yankee Eli Whitney of the cotton gin. We used to walk Whitney Avenue. We had the little waterfall there, the little dam in New Haven. Eli Whitney invented a lot of machinery there, including great pistols and firearms, which were used to end what happened because of the invention of the cotton gin. So slavery at the time of the American Revolution, there were a lot of people, including religious people, who were pretty sure that slavery was just going to die off because tobacco, which had been the main crop in which that labor was used, tobacco is ruinous on soil, and the soils of Virginia were spent. So George Washington manumits his slaves through his will, and before that, he had moved from tobacco agriculture to wheat and corn. Slavery seemed to be dying off, but that left a huge, quoting Charles Dickens, a huge surplus population. What do we do with all these Black people, all these young Black people? Thomas Jefferson said, well, we'll ship them all away, because Black people and white people can't live peaceably together. But then the cotton gin opens up the great Black Belt from Georgia through Mississippi all the way to Texas to a very lucrative new crop, cotton. Cotton was the core of the world economy, and the American South was the core of cotton production. And so there's just this explosion of profitability and wealth coming out of the Black Belt soil, and the surplus population of the Chesapeake area gets relocated there. And that means that young people are taken away from their parents, their native communities, marched several hundred miles, plunked down in a very oppressive labor environment, and they have to make a life for themselves. They have to find an identity for themselves. They have to find a way to hang on by themselves. And that's what the conversion to Christianity involved. So as long as the slave trade from Africa was still open, you had a replenishment. This is a classic immigrant pattern, also for Dutch people, I might add. You have a constant replenishment from the old country, keeping the old traditions alive. When that is cut off and you're uprooted from here and plunked over there with nobody you know around you, you have to redesign, reweave your world, your mental world, and your spiritual world. And this is where a form of evangelical Christianity, a born-again religion, takes off. This is the era of the real conversion of African Americans to Christianity. It's a form of born-again religion, trying to offer dignity and hope amid enslavement and oppression. It also tries to forge a community amid dislocation. There's this fascinating possibility. I don't know if it's ever been proven, but the type of African religion in the areas from which the enslaved people were uprooted, the deltas in Central Africa, the religion there had a great focus on river gods. Right? When you're living in a river environment, you have a focus on river gods. And that might be the reason that the Baptist tradition was the most popular in the enslaved population. We're familiar with this. We're familiar with getting dunked under the water and coming up a new person. That's what our ancestors did. That's what we're doing. Now we're doing it in the name of Jesus, or the name of Jesus. Right? So there's a new thing here, Christianity, new to them, but it's assimilated, it's absorbed in a template of an old thing. So a lot of Christianity, evangelical Christianity, is absorbed on an African template. And I'll dig into that a little more in a minute. But anyway, it's very successful. By 1860, some 15% of the African-American population is formally church affiliated. There's a whole lot more people that aren't church members, but have a sort of folk Christianity that's cultivated in these so-called hush harbors. The enslaved population would sneak away at night to a brush arbor, a copse of trees that might absorb their sound, so they're not detected. The brush arbor becomes a hush harbor where you hear the Bible and you sing songs of your own origination, and you find a way to stay alive and to stay human and to assert the value of yourself and this treasured community in the midst of a very oppressive environment. So 15% formally church affiliated, many, many more kind of an informal, if you will, African folk kind of Christianity. After the Civil War then, finally got to our time period, from 1865 on, we have a racial divide in the Southern denominations. The Baptists and the Methodists, thirdly the Presbyterians, are the strongest denominations in the white South, and most African Americans that belong to a church belong to one of these. After the Civil War, the blacks exit these churches because they are not welcome as full and equal members. And so we have the origination of distinctive African American denominations in the era of Reconstruction. And these are aided by missionaries, sometimes white missionaries, but especially black missionaries, emissaries from the northern black denominations, which had been formed well before the Civil War, the African Methodist Episcopal Church and the AME Zion Church, the one headquartered in Philadelphia, the other headquartered in New York City. These black missionaries came from the north to teach these recently liberated, recently emancipated, rural, illiterate black folk how to do religion right. And they had a mixed reception. This tension will become acute when that Southern black population moves north. Then we have very interesting discussions, let's say, and tensions in these by then well-established northern black churches. But that's presaged by what's happening here in the post-Civil War South. Nonetheless, whether you're kind of self-segregate from the white churches or you're brought out by these missionary enterprises by northern blacks, by 1900, church affiliation had doubled to about 33%. 2.7 of 8.3 million African Americans are formally affiliated with a church. And then again, around that bullseye, if you will, there's another circle of people who are functionally Christian, even if not formally affiliated. In the South, especially, also in the North, but especially in the South, the church is the center of Black life. It's not just a Sunday thing or a Wednesday night thing. It's every day. The church, and I might add, the undertaker's studio are the only institutions in these in these southern villages and southern precincts of major cities. The church and the funeral home are the only institutions entirely under Black control. The bank, a workplace, everything else is a white-dominated institution into which you have to filter, make your way, and try to find your way. But at the church, we are in charge. And in death, we are left alone. So the pastor and the undertaker are the two big guys in the African American community across this continuing black belt of cotton agriculture. It's not just in the villages and the townships, though, but also in the cities where schools and colleges and newspapers are formed. These are very often religiously inspired, religiously supported, religiously centered. So there, just go online and you can find these pictures, like the upper left here, of these. There's such a hunger for education, for schooling in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. They knew the power of literacy, and they were very hungry to get it. And look at how well dressed these little kids are. They put current elementary students, my wife taught in Grand Rapids Public Schools for 25 years. And I might add, they put current university students to shame, right? University student attire is a desperate chance, a desperate attempt to hold on to the illusion of freedom as long as possible. I don't have to wear a suit yet. I'm not in the office. I can hang out. I saw some guys as I was driving in, kind of on their skateboards and their cutoffs and their t-shirts. And yeah, we're ready for a morning of serious learning. Huh? Anyway, there's such a hunger for schooling. And this is the era also when the historically Black colleges and universities are formed, Fisk and Spelman and Morehouse and on they go. These are very often religiously started and religiously tended schools. Also, these are the sites, the churches are the sites of political activism during Reconstruction. A good number of African Americans were elected to local, state, and national office. And very often they came out of the clergy or prominent lay people, laymen, I have to say, in the churches. Then there's the Women's Guild. Traditionally, if you went to an African American church, also in the North, you would meet these ladies. These are the mothers in Israel, right? They greet you at the door, they command the aisles, they wear white gloves, very formal dresses, and they escort you to your seat. They also assemble in the front row of the sanctuary, and they're the Amen chorus, or they're supposed to be the heart of the Amen chorus. And if is that the mic or is that machinery? Okay. If the amens are not coming rapidly or readily enough, the preacher knows he has to step up his game. Because if these ladies don't support you, you're toast. The Ladies Guild, the Women's Guild, is very much an entrepreneurial as well as a spiritual center of these churches. So this is not just a men's world. There are separate compartments or separate departments, but these aspiring, upwardly mobile women are a very important component and create very important functions of the African American church. Okay, pause a minute, see if you have, we're moving on to another section. If any questions on this part, the formation of the African American churches. Yeah, Judy, here.
Just a comment about Frederick Douglass, in
Yeah.
his narrative,
Yeah.
in his appendix there, he talks about slave owners' religion versus Black religion, and there's quite a contrast.
Yeah.
And the Blacks seem more tuned to what we know as scripture.
Yeah, there are, the Bible is a bundle of dynamite, right? And it's the quest of religious authorities to keep the matches away. And Frederick Douglass put it right to the fuse. He had no use for organized white religion. And he thought that organized Black religion was a little bit too complicit as well. But if you read, there's a great biography of him recently published by David Blight, Yale University historian, won the Pulitzer Prize, long biography of Frederick Douglass. And Blight shows how recurrent the themes of Isaiah and the Sermon on the Mount are in Douglass's rhetoric. So he might have left the church, but Christianity had not left him. Very fascinating tension in his psyche, how to hold on to the gold of the gospel when it's so surrounded by the dross of petrifaction. Okay, moving on to the throes of Jim Crow. The Jim Crow era comes after Reconstruction. It begins in the 1880s. It really peaks in the early part of the 20th century. And part of the Great Migration is an attempt to flee this oppressive regime. But with court edicts, very conservative Supreme Court edicts, and the terrorism of the Ku Klux Klan, we see a great shift, a nullification of many of the great accomplishments of Reconstruction, nullification of the Civil Rights Act, a suspension of Black voting rights, social segregation. It is not true that the races had been segregated forever. Indeed, in the pre-Civil War South, the races had to be very close together because you needed that Black labor on Old Massa's plantation. It's after the Civil War that social segregation happens in the South. And to give folks due credit here or discredit, racial segregation had been invented in the North before the Civil War, where there was a large free Black population. These people were kept in separate residential districts, denied schooling, denied voting rights, treated as second-class citizens. So when you no longer had the set hierarchy of slavery to keep these folks in line, you had to create a new system, and that was social segregation with second-class citizenship. And this is enforced by the horrible wave of lynchings. Some 5,000 people were lynched between 1880 and 1968, as late as that. 75% of them were Black. Don't want to dwell on these pictures, but just a couple items here. Sometimes these corpses, once dead, would be rated for body parts as mementos. So take a finger, take an ear. Postcards, photographs of these would be taken, and these would be turned into postcards that you could send to your relatives. Yeah, we had quite an event here in Mississippi. You send that off to your relatives in Atlanta or whatever, and you see this mass mobilization. These events were publicized, advertised well in advance very often, so you could get a maximum crowd there. This is the most outrageous and egregious and also symbolic way to reinforce the Jim Crow Code. If you know as a young man that this could happen to you, you would be well advised to stay in line and try to live your life with that threat hanging over your head. Responses to the descent of Jim Crow spread across the spectrum from left to right. The most radical response was back to Africa. America has no future for us. We are doomed to permanent second-class citizenship here. And the ablest exponent of that was Henry McNeil Turner, a pastor and a bishop in the African American Methodist Church in Georgia. During Reconstruction, he had been in the state legislature. After that was closed off, and as he saw this new regime, many ways slavery, but all in all but name, as he saw this new regime descend across the South, he said, "America has no future for us. We have to be released from Egypt and go to the promised land." And the promised land was Africa. So emigration to Africa. Sometimes this was called back to Africa, but of course these people were all American born. And sometimes they had a rude shock when they arrived in Africa and were not always well received by the local people. Because as it's in the soil here, as Americans, they tended to have an idea that they knew better and wanted to teach these benighted local folks the best way to live. Liberia, the great experiment for colonizing people out of the United States. Liberia has suffered from this syndrome politically to this day. So back to Africa is not an uncheckered movement, but it's a measure of the despair and the anger at the betrayal of the promise of the Declaration of Independence that the radical edge of the African-American population felt. The moderate response, so-called moderate, a lot of whites are very scared about this response, is exemplified by Francis Grimke. Francis Grimke was the son of the South Carolina aristocracy. His white father was one of the richest people, most politically powerful people in Charleston, South Carolina. After the Civil War, he would move on to be educated at Lincoln University, historically Black university outside Philadelphia, and then at Princeton Theological Seminary. So he's a good Presbyterian guy. He might even been a distinguished pastor, a preacher, Doug. And he was pastor at the 15th Street Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C. for 50 years. A picture of it here. This is a real power center in African America, the network, especially in Washington, D.C., right up from the Capitol. He's has this opportunity because of two of his famous tantas, Angelina and Sarah Grimke. Angelina Grimke Weld was one of the most prominent white female abolitionist speakers before the Civil War. They had fled their home and their abusive brother, the father of Francis, they had fled that home before the Civil War to go on the abolitionist trail. When Angelina and Sarah read in a newspaper after the Civil War that this kid, Francis Grimke, was a student at Lincoln University, they got in touch with him and looked him up. They found out that they had a blood relation, and they sponsored his further education. So he marries into the African-American elite in Philadelphia. So he's a real power broker. He's in the system and on top of the system, but wants to work from within the system to change it. So he's a co-founder of the NAACP. He kind of replicates Frederick Douglass's model. We are not content. We are not going to simply accept the Jim Crow system. We are going to call America to its higher ideals, and we're going to agitate for that endlessly. And that's what Francis Grimke thought his pulpit and his church was for. And so they're constantly agitating within the system rather than leaving the system. This is an old question in reform movements. Do you stay within the system, try to change it from within, or do you say the heck with it, move out of it, and create a radical alternative outside? Perennial question, and we have the two classic answers so far. And then there's the third answer. You accommodate within the system. You accept some of its basic architecture and lineaments, and try to find your own place of progress and dignity within it. And this is the option most classically espoused by Booker T. Washington, founder of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, but also taken up by Black Baptist clergy like Charles Octavius Booth, pictured the lower left there. And this says, okay, we give up our political rights. We give up our political hopes. Our voting rights have been taken away, okay, because politics is not the core of our opportunity or our identity anyway. Social integration or segregation, well, segregation gives us possibilities. We'll create our own world, and we don't have to hang around with white people. Now, that's kind of fun too. We can create our own world. They meant it for oppression, but it gives us an opportunity. So be entrepreneurial, self-disciplined, accept some of these unequal limitations, but make the most of it and create a world for ourselves by pursuing education and self-improvement. So if you read Booker T's autobiography, Up from Slavery, it's a story of self-fashioning, much like Frederick Douglass in this way. He's always also talking about self-discipline and pursuing education, and not relying on white people for your future, but relying on yourselves. It's just whether you challenge the political system or accept it and do your best without that. And in this option too, the church is there to provide a moral base, to provide inspiration, and to provide consolation when the pinch of the system drives you to suffering. So radical, moderate, and the conservative accommodation. These are three classic responses in African American life to the Jim Crow system, and the church was at the center of them all. So looking back at this, let's see, I'm going to, what time? To 11? Okay. Looking back at African American religion before the Great Migration, it was often accused also by prominent leaders, prominent religious leaders in African American life of being pie in the sky. And there was a great deal of emphasis upon the soul more than on the body, on salvation rather than revolution, on heaven. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. If heaven weren't my home, oh Lord, what would I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's golden shore, and I don't want to be in this world anymore. Well, if you were a sharecropper in the Cotton Belt, that song might well make sense. When a roll is called on you up yonder, I'll be there, and that's where my life will begin. But we, subsequent historians have re-examined what these words, soul, salvation, and heaven meant. They were not all to be taken literally. These were not all otherworldly emphases. What is salvation? In the Black tradition, there are two ambassadors or emissaries of salvation. There's Jesus for yourself, and there's Moses for the community. The book of Exodus is key here. And the book of Revelation, not taken in the usual white way, but the great uprising in around 1830 of Nat Turner in rural Virginia put the fear of God or the devil into the white community. This was an armed insurrection, which cost the lives of many whites in that area. Nat Turner was a self-educated Baptist preacher who was literate and was just enthralled by the book of Revelation. Because if you read the book of Revelation, I'm on an online Bible study on the book of Revelation these days. you read that thing again, boy, howdy, is there a lot of wrath and a lot of revenge and a lot of getting even with the by God's chosen people over against the horrible oppressor. Now, this was the early Christian community responding to Nero, perhaps. It's also Nat Turner responding to the oppressions of slavery. So salvation is double-edged. There's saving your soul, but there's also saving the body of the faithful here for a better life here and now. What does soul mean? It doesn't negate the body, but it affirms human dignity at the core of the self and at the core of the community over against a world that every day is putting you down. Every day is telling you that you're worthless or at best second rate. Every day, every encounter, every moment, you're being told this. How do you not give in and knuckle under or go into a rage and flail and get yourself killed? The weekly ministrations at church, where you are told, reminded again by stories ancient and modern, that there's a part of you that this world cannot touch or does not determine. There's a part of you that is measured by there's a part of earth that is measured by heavenly standards. So that's what heaven is about. It's a standard, a transcendent standard that can put to naught all the standards of this world that are teaching you that you're worthless. So it's a way to keep faith, hope, and love alive on this earth in the face of a situation that is saying that you have no hope and your faith is foolish. You know, what's love got to do with it? Huh? Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it? So these words can be escapist, but they pack more of they pack a double meaning. And this, you can catch this. The book cover that I have on the bottom here, James Weldon Johnson is the author. He's the author of the so-called Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice. God's Trombones, get a hold of it. And maybe get a hold of a sound recording that goes along with it. These are, Johnson grew up in the Black Belt in Georgia, and he's part of the Harlem Renaissance. He tried to put into poetic form the main cadences and messages of his boyhood preachers. And if you listen to these words as you read them, you can hear the pace, you can hear the rhythm of the delivery. And it's so telling the flood story, telling the story of the Exodus, telling the classic biblical Old Testament stories, especially in rural Southern Black folk Christian cadences. It's a wonderful book. God's Trombones. Okay, Great Migration, but again, a pause for any questions on this part. Yeah, back then.
You mentioned James Weldon Johnson. When we lived in Ohio, every Good Friday, we had a crosswalk down the streets of Dublin that ended at the community church.
Mm-hmm.
But for, oh gosh, I bet the last 20 years that I was there, I would read James Weldon Johnson's The Crucifixion as part of that Good Friday service. Just powerful. So
yeah,
thanks for bringing up that memory.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't resist making a comment here that when I was in school at the University of Chicago, we had an apartment on 48th and Lake Park, And that was a block from a great big AME Zion church in that. And they had the full regalia. The minister would park his Cadillac in the front yard. The women with the white gloves would greet people. And then as cars came up, we had young boys run out in white gloves. They would open the
Wow.
car doors and things. And in summer Sunday evening, we could hear them rocking away in our 13th floor apartment in that. So it was quite a production. But 3 blocks from that was one of the central living areas of the Black Muslims in that. And Muhammad Ali lived right across the street from that and that. And they were very influential in the Kenwood neighborhood there as well. And that. So another shoot of Black religion, of course, very strong at that time in the 70s and 80s was the Black Muslims. And then we went to a little Episcopal church there that was about 4 blocks in the other direction in that. And it probably had 100 people, probably 80% white. But all of their music came from a rotating soloist through Chicago Symphony in that. And so again, obviously they were very well endowed as a church to be able to do that. But again, it was interesting how these were all included within a few blocks here in Kenwood. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for the great introduction too. You just hit on some of the really key themes that key consequences of this great migration. One more question up here.
I just noticed on your one picture of that lynching, those look like white people being lynched.
Well, I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
Yeah, 25% of the people who were lynched were white. Against vagrants, guys passing through town, guys who weren't part of the structure, suspicious, there were robberies, there were assaults on women and so forth, or alleged assaults on women. But 75% were African-American and 25% were, and you could predict that none of the whites, none of that white 25% were rich. So it was a class, and this continues in this country to this day. Class and race are really interconnected, and interact with each other in more than one way. So, okay, let's move to the third part then, the Great Migration. There's a nifty map there. You can see that this is a kind of a area-specific migration. So from Georgia, Carolinas, and Virginia, and Florida, movement up into the great cities of the Northeast, Philadelphia, New York, and so forth. African Americans in Michigan tend very much to come from Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. In a book I did on religion in Grand Rapids, I focused on Messiah Missionary Baptist, and so I had a chance to interview some of the old families in that church. And man, I thought I was in a Christian Reformed church because they all knew each other and they all came from the same town in Tennessee. And this is classic migration. If you look into Italian neighborhoods in New Haven, you'll find common provincial origin in Italy. They don't come from Italy, they come from Abruzzi, they come from Sicily, and so forth and so on. And from the old Southwest, from Louisiana and Texas, a great migration to the West Coast. So from 1614 to, I'm sorry, 16, I taught early America. From 1914 to 1970, we have a relocation of some 6 million people, largely from the rural South to the urban North and West. So in 1914, at the beginning of this process, 90% of African Americans lived in the South and 60% of them were rural. In 1970, at the end of this process, some 50% of African Americans live in the North and 75% of them are urban. So again, it's kind of a replication of the great migration out of all the countries of Europe to the United States. You're leaving increasingly untenable agricultural situation. One of my grandmothers came from Sint Jacobi Parochie in Friesland. They were day laborers, kind of sharecroppers, and there's nothing left there but huge agricultural fields. These used to be little plots that my great-grandpa would try to eke a living out of growing cauliflower. And it's all a huge mega farm now. Well, this is the process that just spread all across Europe. Small-scale agricultural life was no longer tenable. It was no longer tenable economically. So you have people leaving these rural precincts of all these different European countries, coming to American cities and trying to figure out what's up and how to hang on here. Same thing is going on with these folks. And the church will be very important in that relocation process. The Great Migration begins with the beginning of World War I, because all of a sudden the labor supply from Europe is cut off. The American industrial machine is still in need of labor, so they draw people, African Americans from the South, often with great racial tensions resulting in northern cities. Most egregious example is happened in Detroit in the heart of World War II, when Black families try to move into white neighborhoods because there's such a housing shortage, and you have a major race riot, that is, white on black violence in the middle of Detroit, with the sons and daughters from the white and black families being in Europe or in the Pacific trying to fight for liberty, right? This is the peak of an old process that begins with this Great Migration. So in 1914, World War I cuts off the European supply, and then in 1924, we have the Draconian Immigration Reform Act that cuts off immigration by 90%. And again, the black labor from the South meets that supply need. With the Great Depression in the 1930s, we see something of a reverse of that tide. Last hired, first fired. African Americans are the first to be displaced from these industrial jobs. Some of them filter back south. And then with the return of prosperity in World War II and thereafter, that tide reverses again. We're only going to consider up to about 1940 here. And there's also, maybe some of you read this. It was, for me, a real breakthrough book, kind of my introduction to African-American life and race relations in America, Man-Child in the Promised Land. Any of you read that? 1960s book. I'm dating myself. It's the only date I can get, I know. But yeah, the North was seen as something of the promised land. We're going to escape the system of legal segregation and oppression in the South. We're going to move to the North, where there's equal rights for all. Sort of, maybe, yeah. And it's Man-Child is about facing some of the hypocrisies and the false promises in that slogan. So here we have the syndrome that I talked about with these Black Northern missionaries coming to the South right after the Civil War. Here it's reversed and goes to scale, because we have hundreds of thousands of people coming out of really primitive sorts of churches, as you see on the left there. This is a typical Black Baptist church in the South, moving into fashionable, well-established, kind of posh Black congregations, or pretending to be posh Black congregations in the North. like Reverend Grimke's church in Washington. And you'll see these in Chicago at the AME Zion Church. You know, that church picture here in the center is a classic depiction of immigrant aspiration. You know, we have nothing. We came from nothing. We're trying to survive in this world. We're working our way up. Like St. Adelbert's in on the west side of Grand Rapids. Polish immigrants who had nothing but the dirt jobs in the furniture factories built this magnificent basilica, and it had to be debt-free before the bishop would consecrate it, and they made it by 1913. So these churches, also for Black immigrants, if you will, are the tokens, the symbols that we're respectable, that we've made it, that we have talent. And this is our advertisement to the world that, you know, we have what it takes and we've made it. And now these illiterate, dusty, ill-clothed, ill-housed migrants are pouring up from the south, are pouring up into the north. And well, welcome, brothers and sisters, but please clean up your act. Please don't harm our reputation. We'll see the same thing, by the way, next time with Jewish immigration. The German Jews who had established themselves in the Reform Jewish movement by the 1880s, all of a sudden are seeing these garlic smelling people from Russia and Poland come pouring in. And they're going to give us a bad name. So there's a combination here of solidarity and of kind of shame or perceived insult in the primitive meeting the polished. And so what we have as a result of that is the emergence of the storefront church. You see them still. I mean, we're 2 blocks away from where I live in Grand Rapids, all along South Division there. They're now with Spanish names. Church of Resurrection Life and Church of the True God, the Apostolic this and that. Again, if we're not welcome in these churches of people who think, even though they share the same skin color, they don't think that we're equal to them, well, then we'll form our own. So we have enthusiastic storefront churches, very often holiness, and we'll get into that next time, and a Pentecostal affiliation. So, yeah, and we'll get to the some other variety in Black religious life in a minute, well, right here. So the vast majority of these people are moving in Christian channels, but there are some interesting examples, or exceptions, I should say. So beyond Christianity, one, a movement of self-described, self-named Ethiopian Hebrews. You can see that their upper picture there, they're carrying the Torah scrolls into Saturday morning worship. Women probably head covered and so forth. They claim to be Orthodox Jews. They claim direct descent from that meeting of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Those two individuals did not just exchange wisdom. And the state of Israel recognizes some of these people anyway as authentic descendants, authentic Jewish descendants, and give them admission to the nation of Israel, although the practice is very much a second-class citizenship. So the Ethiopian Hebrews in the United States are not making this up out of whole cloth. Very touching scene here, lower right, where these kids are going to Hebrew school. These little Black kids in Chicago or New York, and they're learning Hebrew characters. Yeah? And you know, the picture of their church, the Ethiopian Hebrew congregation, their self description is commandment keepers. They honor Torah, and they practice worship in classic Jewish way. Second is a version of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, founded in 1913 by the noble Drew Ali, pictured on the right. Here it's interesting, they did not call themselves African or Ethiopian. They called themselves Moabite or Moorish or Asiatic as in ethnicity. Moorish being the northern fringe of Africa along the Mediterranean, Morocco, with a very noble Muslim heritage. And these folks are indeed Muslim in religion. Sounds to me kind of Shia-like, mystical practice that will bring a personal transformation. Noble Drew Ali dies in 1929, and the Nation of Islam is founded the next year in Detroit by Wallace Fard Muhammad. Detroit, 1930, not a happy place to be. The auto industry has just collapsed. Unemployment is starting to skyrocket. Racial tensions are in the air. What are the churches doing about it? Well, they're trying to accommodate. They're trying to keep up. They're trying to keep the offerings lucrative enough to keep the pastor employed. Well, the heck with that. We need a radical, different beginning. And so Wallace Fard Muhammad founds the Nation of Islam, colloquially known as the Black Muslims. And he mysteriously disappears in 1934. And he's replaced by Elijah Muhammad, who also comes from Georgia, a kind of a holiness preacher family, but converts to Islam and leads the Nation of Islam from 1934 to 1975, 40 years. And it's in this era, in the 50s and 60s, that the two most famous emissaries of the Nation of Islam emerge on the American scene, Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. Malcolm X famously and fatally for himself breaks with Elijah Muhammad in the mid 60s or early 60s. If you haven't read his autobiography, it is really well worth reading. It's fairly heavily doctored, maybe, but it's very gripping first-person account of what it's like to grow up in Lansing, Michigan, see your father gunned down by a Klan member, see your mother spiral off into mental illness. She's hospitalized in what was a hellhole in Kalamazoo State Institution, adopted by a family in Mason, Michigan, move off to Harlem as Detroit Red, get involved in petty crime, trying to stay alive, get imprisoned, and there in prison, symbol of the imprisonment of Black life in general, there in prison, gets the message of the Nation of Islam with a great, radically different worldview I'll get to in a minute, and a great path forward other than the alternative to the path prescribed for you, both by Black and white community. Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, after the father's death, aligns the nation with standard Sunni Islam, and that meets resistance by Louis Farrakhan, who reasserts Nation of Islam distinctives. Was the Black Muslim congregation, was that aligned with was that Farrakhan's place, temple?
The whole group of houses that was for Elijah Muhammad and his followers.
Yeah.
And then, as they say, Muhammad Ali had a mansion across the street. Well, during that time, but they were aligned with Elijah Muhammad, not with the.
Okay. So, yeah. On one of the, I don't know if it's Stony Island Avenue or something, coming up into the city from the southeast, you pass Farrakhan's mosque. Big and very impressive. A lot of gold in there. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. One of the reasons that Malcolm X, is attracted to this, and so many other Black kids, teenagers, young 20s, in prison, is that it gives a radically alternative view of the world, and therefore a very different path through life from the standard things taught both in white and Black circles. Goes back to creation, a dual creation story. So Allah created true humanity, which is Asiatic, like Moorish, or Black, whereas the evil scientist Yaqub created whites, an inferior and malevolent race. So Allah did it right in the first place. He created Black people who are naturally good. Yaqub created kind of Frankenstein out of a laboratory, cobbled together these white inferiors who are bad. In his mysterious will, Allah allows whites to control the world for 6,000 years, but that age is soon to end. So here's the apocalyptic, the millenarian theme coming over from Christianity. The oppressed are always drawn to Revelation. The bad guys are in charge, but the good guys will soon be in charge, and great will be the chaos and the cacophony and bloodshed in between. Islam is the true religion and the proper Black religion. Christianity is white man's religion. The lifestyle is one of strict discipline, healthy diet, kosher, no alcohol, no tobacco, and a sexual modesty. And you see in the lower picture here, the segregated, sex-segregated women's part of temple worship, mosque worship, with head coverings and so forth. There's an emphasis here on Black pride, economic self-determination, purchase stuff only from Black-owned stores, and Black nationalism. This is not Black Islam, this is the nation of Islam. We are a separate people. We are a nation within this oppressive nation. We are a nation of self-determination, pride, dignity, and progress. And as I'm driving up Eastern Avenue from my house toward our church in the center city, on Saturday night, Sunday morning, you'll see young men dressed like these folks in the upper right, peddling the newspaper at the stoplight. And I feel bad because they never offer me a copy to buy. It's the Black guy ahead of me and the Black car behind me, but not me. But dressed to the nines, carrying themselves with considerable pride and an image of strength. So everything that white people have taught you about yourself is wrong. We have a creation story and a fulfillment story to teach you a new way of life and a new sense of self. And then a fourth version beyond Christianity, or maybe sort of within Christianity. This is Father M.J. Divine, aka Father Divine. His active ministry was from 1907 to 1965, originated in Georgia, brought his mission to New York City and then to Philadelphia. Kind of and he claimed himself, Father Divine, he meant it. I'm God, and you can be too. This is an all-American religion, right? I am God, and you can be too. This is the ultimate self-made man. And he's kind of a contemporary of Norman Vincent Peale with the same message, positive thinking. He's an advocate of New Thought, descended out of Mary Baker Eddy and Christian Science, and arguably out of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Get to that later in this course. Positive thinking. We create ourselves by controlling our thoughts, and there's nothing to keep us from ascending to perfection. He would, in the midst of the Depression, he would create these huge banquets to which people would flock. And he said, if you like this, follow me and I will give you even greater things. kind of Jesus-ish, huh? I'll give you spiritual food as well as physical food. But he also had a social message in the midst of the Depression. Again, entrepreneurial, organizing resale shops and pressing for civil rights. Finally, out of African-American life in the Great Migration comes some world-spanning innovations, stuff that was kind of forged here in the United States, forged also in African-American side of the United States that really become have global reach. And the first is the celebrity preacher of prosperity theology. Doug didn't mention this time, but my wife and I taught for a couple different semesters on the semester at sea. Floating university, it's a fantastic thing. You have to work your tail off. Tina had to locate happy hour. That was her job. I had my whole life 3 courses on world religions on a flash drive because there's no internet at sea, right? So my whole life is here. I was busy the summer before, but we among the places we stopped was Accra in Ghana, and tooling around that city, I have never seen more billboards for prosperity theology and revivals soon coming. And we went to one of these things. I took some students to one of these things. Ear-splitting volume of praise and worship with the minister up front eventually, healing sick people and handing out money and having people come up and testify how his, the promises that had been made a month before had been fulfilled. Prosperity theology with celebrity preachers and really high production value worship performances. Sweet Daddy Grace was an African-American innovator of this. Marcelino Manuel de Graca, Cape Verdean, and that was an old Portuguese colony, huh? With the great Portuguese migration to Massachusetts and Rhode Island. He was part of that, became an itinerant minister and a faith healer, and created a multi-city network called the United House of Prayer for All Nations. Again, God wants to bless you, brothers and sisters, and the only thing keeping you from that blessing is your own willful ignorance and resistance. Just give in to me. Oh, no, don't give in to me. Follow me. Some contributions, monetary form, would be welcome along the way. And you can be like me, very well clothed, carrying on a lavish lifestyle. Does this man look like Joel Osteen? Well, he really is. Very savvy business person. And to promote the ministry, there's the constant sale of blessed products. You can get that prayer shawl for just $25 contribution. You can get this anointing oil for just $50. Send your check now. Second world-spanning innovation that comes out of African-American life is Pentecostalism. And this is the big winner, right? This is the key to the spread of Christianity in the global South and East, which is now the center of world Christianity. Pentecostalism. It's born in Topeka, Kansas on the first day of the 20th century, New Year's Day, 1901, under the ministry of, in an upper room in Topeka, where at the prayer vigil into the new year, people started speaking in tongues. Parham took this on the road, and he was preaching in Houston, Texas, when a black man, William Seymour, came and wanted to be part of the group. He was not allowed in the main room. He had to sit in the outside hallway and listen in. And he learned well, because after Parham fell into sexual scandal, Seymour took this to LA, the go west young man, took it to LA and began the Azusa Street Mission, which came into in 1906, came into a multi-year revival in which Pentecostal gifts were highlighted and exemplified and taught. And people went out from there all over the United States and eventually around the world, bearing the idea that Pentecost was at hand. And when all nations had converted to or had received the gospel message, Jesus could finally return. This is a quick mission strategy. You don't have to convert Koreans, you don't have to learn Korean, because the Spirit will give you utterance when you arrive in Korea, and you'll know Korean, or you'll know Japanese, or you'll know Chinese. No need for study. The Spirit will give you utterance. And sometimes it worked. Not that we're speaking in Korean, but you know how important nonverbal communication is, right? This message spread and like wildfire across the United States and around the world. We'll get more into this later, but there's conventional salvation, the first blessing of justification. You'll have a second blessing of entire sanctification, by which your will is totally aligned with the will of God. Then there's the third blessing, the gifts of the Holy Ghost, especially tongues and healing, all of which will pave the way for the imminent return of Christ. So you have 4 items here in Pentecostal theology, the 4 cornerstones, or the 4 square gospel. Amy Semple McPherson will get a hold of this in LA, bring it to Hollywood with really, really outstanding production values. Enthusiastic worship and spirit possession. And, when I did that Grand Rapids book, I went to Bethel Pentecostal and saw Slain in the Spirit right in front of me. And when I was in Ghana in Accra, there it was. They don't have catcher in the rye. They have people to catch behind the people who are being slain in the Spirit, to catch them so they don't hurt themselves. This is born in LA and has conquered the world. And then the third and final world-spanning innovation is Black gospel music. And here's the site of controversy in your AME Zion Church, because the happy, enthusiastic singing of that evening service was not welcome at the start. These folks from the South were all enthusiastic. They wanted to feel them some Jesus. And standard big city Black religion at that time was fairly Presbyterian-like, right? We don't move. We certainly don't get enthusiastic. So this was a real culture war. You guys maybe went through the worship wars in your church a couple decades ago. Do we stay with the old hymnal, or do we have well, here's where I stand, the happy clappy, right? 3 words, 5 notes, 20 times, right? That was our worship war. This was the African-American big city church worship war. And the people who lost those wars, the newcomers, would often go off to their storefronts. But eventually, Black gospel music conquered the whole show. Great founder here is Thomas Dorsey from 1930. He blends existing gospel songs to the blues and spreads it via the new technologies of records and radio. It's very popular in the so-called primitive churches, and it moves up into the polished churches, and it has since spread from Black to white churches, especially carried by Pentecostalism. So in the great irony of religious history, Jesus said it too, the least will be first. The people most oppressed in America, with gospel music, Pentecostalism, and their own kind of prosperity theology, have become really leaders, not only on the American, but the world religious scene. So, 10 minutes for questions.
Is that church on the bottom right? I missed it as I was taking notes, maybe. Is that a 4-square church? It sure looks like one.
It is 4 square, but that's Thomas Dorsey's church in Chicago. And I don't remember do you remember the name of this church? It's, yeah. So yeah, he, upward mobility, right? He starts out as a blues singing itinerant, and he winds up running, a very substantial piece of real estate in a big city. Steve.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about just how Black gospel kind of morphed into soul and Motown? Aretha Franklin and several of the great African American Motown soul singers got their start singing in church.
All these, well, especially the women, like the Supremes and Aretha and so forth. So many of the women started out in the choir at church, and I don't really understand. I mean, there's some, let's say, really earthy stuff in soul, right? And in rap, very earthy stuff, and how that comports with standard Protestant ethics. I asked my former colleague Randall Jokes, I asked this, he said, "Oh, come on, it's a whole gospel for the whole body." But yeah, this was the birthplace, and it got taken over. I mean, there are some African American churches still today that resist this because of its worldliness. Well, a classic case in point, Grand Rapids kid from Memphis, Tennessee, Al Green, who had very slinky soul music, forswore it and became a preacher in Memphis again, but then went back to him. Tina and I saw him at the old Civic Auditorium in Grand Rapids, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago. And he's saying, if you think this stuff is too sexy, where did you come from? So there's that's a traffic that was long suspected in the Black South. If you went to the juke joint, you don't show up here on Sunday morning. But it's assimilated, comes over. We have this style of music without the lyrics. We have Jesus stuff instead. But that style is making you move in ways that used to be verboten. So it's a mystery I don't understand, but it's clearly there. Yeah, Aretha's father was maybe the premier Black preacher in Detroit in the civil rights days. There's a great biography, Reverend C.E. Franklin. I don't remember the title, but fascinating that she not only came out of that choir, but she came out of those dinner conversations, and how did that impact her? That's an interesting thing about. Yeah.
It's not too early to mention Sister Rosetta Tharpe. If you don't know of her, you've got to check her out. She was a Black, kind of invented rock and roll. Actually, she was before Elvis and a tremendous influence. But there she was playing her rock licks on the guitar. And she was in church for huge crowds. She didn't record much, but what she did packs a punch.
What's her name?
Sister Rosetta Tharpe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you ever get to Memphis, you got to go to Graceland. You got to see Elvis. I mean, what happens to a Tupelo Pentecostal country boy when you give him $1 million? What happens is shag carpeting, not just in the basement, but in the hallway going down, the staircase going down to the basement, on the walls and the ceiling. Okay, because if some is good, more is better. So I was going through there the first time just laughing, and all of a sudden you get to the old hallway where he used to have his rifle range, and it's just covered end to end with platinum records. Nobody's ever done that before, and nobody will ever do it again. It's just an outstanding musician. You go there, you go to the Civil Rights Museum in the old motel where King was assassinated. You can go to that room. Then you go to Sun Studios and you see it's still, the original recording studio is still there. You can stand in front of the mic and dream of, being a star. Elvis, Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison, and U2 recorded there. There's just a incredible mix of stuff in Memphis, and the power, the influence of Black life out of there into the world is exemplified in that city. Then you go to Rendezvous Ribs for dinner, dry broiled with their own special sauce. Even my vegetarian wife went along with me, bless her.
Just another question,
Oh, sorry.
kind of off this.
Yeah.
Where did the term, or who was Jim Crow? What was?
Oh, Jim Crow, that originates, it's a mythical figure. It originates in a pre-Civil War minstrel song. So minstrel shows were very often white people going in blackface. That's why it's a very controversial thing. Adapting Black music and Black styles, but only to ridicule. So there's a poem in there in a song from that era. I'll just do this. Oh, I can't remember. This again, that again. Turn about and turn about and turn just so. And every time I turn about, I jump Jim Crow. So it's that's the ditty that comes from. But it's blackface, white minstrelsy, adapting Black stuff to keep it in its place. So that became an emblem of this whole segregation system.
If I have a chance to read one book about this coming week, what book should I read?
Oh, man. Well, the autobiography of Malcolm X covers the background, covers things well up to the 60s. And what comes after that, so for this era, the industrial city, I found it so gripping. If you're in the mood for fiction, I think one of James Baldwin's greatest novels is Go Tell It on the Mountain. He grew up as a son of a Black Pentecostal preacher in Harlem, who did not spare the rod. It was a pretty abusive household from his father. And it's Go Tell It on the Mountain is his birthday, his 13th birthday, when he's kind of wandering around Manhattan from Harlem down south of Central Park, and his reflections on life as a young teenager. Really very gripping novel. Yeah, there you go.
I think we're at the end, unless there's one quick one. Otherwise, thank you so much. This was fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.